All right, today we're tackling a real ancient mystery, one that comes from one of the most debated and, honestly, most influential passages in all of ancient literature, the suffering servant in the book of Isaiah.
So, who is this mysterious figure? For centuries, that's been the big question. Is this just a poetic way of talking about the entire nation of Israel suffering through hardship? Or is the prophet Isaiah pointing to a single, unique individual, someone with a mission that could change everything? That's the puzzle we're going to try and solve today.
Okay, so our investigation kicks off in Isaiah chapter 50. This is where we get our first real breadcrumbs, the first big clues that start to point us in a certain direction.
Right away, something just jumps off the page. The servant is speaking for himself in the first person. And listen to what he says about his own character. Perfect obedience. He's making it super clear that he's taking on this tough mission completely willingly. No resistance, no turning back.
And this is where it gets really interesting. You see, you have the servant here claiming he's perfectly obedient, but that's a huge contrast to how Isaiah describes the nation of Israel elsewhere in the book, often calling them rebellious and blind. It's like night and day. And that difference? That's our first major clue that the prophet might be talking about someone totally separate from the nation.
So that one little distinction, it basically starts this huge historical debate. And believe me, trying to figure out who people thought the servant was, it's not a straight line. The answer has actually changed like a lot over the centuries.
If you ask a lot of scholars today, they'll tell you the servant isn't a single person. Instead, they see it as a symbol, a personification of the entire nation of Israel, suffering through exile and hardship on the world stage.
But if you look back at history, that wasn't always the thinking, not even close. The earliest interpretations were actually pretty different. This idea of the whole nation being the servant, that really took hold much, much later, in the Middle Ages, often in response to Christian claims about Jesus.
In fact, some really ancient Jewish sources point in a completely different direction. Take a look at this quote. It's from something called the Targum of Jonathan, which is an old Aramaic paraphrase of the Hebrew Scriptures. It's not subtle at all. It comes right out and says that Isaiah's servant is the Messiah. So yeah, that idea was definitely around in Jewish thought way before the Middle Ages.
All right, this brings us to the real heart of the mystery. We're talking about the famous passage that starts in Isaiah 52 and runs all the way through chapter 53. This is where the picture of the servant goes from a sketch to a super detailed, high-definition portrait. And right out of the gate, we're hit with this huge paradox. On one hand, the text says this servant will be incredibly successful, exalted, lifted up high. But then, in the same breath, it describes him as being completely humiliated, so disfigured he barely looks human. How does that work? He's going to be lifted up, but first, he has to be brought lower than literally anyone else.
So that's the million-dollar question, right? How are those two things connected? How can total humiliation be the road to total victory? Well, the text actually gives us the key, and it all comes down to one single, really important Hebrew word that unlocks the whole purpose behind his suffering. So the text says that because of his humiliation, the servant will sprinkle many nations. Now, I know that probably sounds a little weird to us today, but believe me, in its original context, that phrase was absolutely loaded with meaning. The Hebrew word is nazah. And check this out, this is so important. It's used 24 times in the Old Testament, and almost every single time it's talking about a priestly ritual. Cleansing and purification, usually with water or blood. So, using that specific word here, it's painting a really powerful picture. The suffering isn't just suffering. It's a priestly act designed to cleanse the nations of their sin. Now, this idea of cleansing is so radical, so challenging, I guess, that some modern translations actually change the word. Instead of sprinkle, they'll say startle. But you should know, that's just a guess. There are no ancient manuscripts that say startle. All the evidence we have points to sprinkle. The original Hebrew is crystal clear.
Okay, so if he's this great purifier, why does everyone reject him? Well, the passage gives us the answer. He's totally overlooked because he just doesn't look the part. He doesn't have the signs you'd expect from a hero. He comes from nothing special, he looks totally ordinary, and in the end he's despised and rejected by the very people he's there to help.
And all of this leads right to the final, jaw-dropping reveal of the whole prophecy. It's this incredible moment of mistaken identity. The crowd watching this unfold, they completely, totally misunderstand what's actually happening right in front of their eyes.
The text sets up this massive contrast between what people thought was happening and what was really happening. The onlookers, the we in the passage, they look at this guy suffering and they think, wow, God must really be punishing him for something awful he did. They totally judged him. But then, the text flips it all around. It pulls back the curtain and says, nope, you've got it all wrong. He was carrying your pain, bearing your sickness. And that's the big twist, the great reversal. His suffering wasn't about his own guilt at all. It was an act of substitution. He was taking the punishment that belonged to them onto himself. And that right there is the solution to the entire mystery of why he had to suffer.
When you see that, it just transforms the whole passage, doesn't it? It stops being a sad story about a misunderstood victim. Instead, it becomes this radical new vision of what a savior could be. Someone whose victory doesn't come from power or fighting, but from suffering on behalf of others. Which leaves us with one last big question to think about. If that's how victory is won, what does it really mean to be a hero?